This is We Bleed Orange and Black, the podcast for Halloween and horror lovers. Join us as we interview creators, discuss our favorite folklore, and share original spooky stories. I'm Jeff C. Carter, and this week we're talking with Clay Vermulm about his new book, CAIRN. Clay Vermulm is a Montana-born, Washington-based author of horror and contemporary dark fiction. He's a staff writer and producer with Itchy Rodent Films, an assistant editor at Nightmare Magazine, and the managing editor for the annual Crypticon Seattle Writing Contest anthology. He also hosts and produces two podcasts, Beneath the Rain Shadow and Fermented Fiction. When he's not doing all that, he enjoys hiking, climbing, surfing, and gaming with his wife and cat. Clay, that's a little misleading. It makes it sound like your cat is your wife, or vice versa.
That's fair.
Either way, welcome back to the show. I have an icebreaker question for you. Did you get up into the mountains this winter?
This winter, no, not really. I don't do a ton of winter mountain stuff. I used to ski a lot more, but skiing is really expensive these days. And frankly, I can't really afford it. And also, it wasn't a great winter for skiing out in the Cascades, where I usually go anyway. We had a really weird winter in terms of snow. We had those crazy floods, and we had a atmospheric river, it was called. If you didn't live in Washington, you may not have heard of this, but there was some catastrophic flooding in my home state. Everybody thought, oh, this is going to be great. It's gonna get so much snow up on the mountains, but even up there, it more just rained, so it just got rid of all the snow. So it was no good for anybody. It closed Highway 2 for a pretty extended period of time, which is one of the main highways. I usually ski in Stevens Pass on Highway 2 when I do ski. So that was actually closed for a long time. So yeah, I was a bit limited in my winter stuff. What I did do a lot this winter was surf, actually, because here, if you live on the peninsula, you're either on the north side of it, where you're on the Strait of Juan de Fuca. That's where most people are, like Port Angeles and Squim area, which is where I live. And the swells in the strait are weird. They come in from the ocean, and they have to come all the way down the strait to get you waves. And they kind of also sometimes bounce off British Columbia, basically, like a water in a big bathtub. So in the winter, you get way bigger swells, and on the Pacific, it can get pretty huge and pretty nasty and strong, kind of too big for me, honestly. But in the strait, it starts to get to a better size. So winter surfing, long story short, out here is really fun. Did a lot of that.
I think we probably talked about this on our first podcast or something, just about surfing or winter surfing. I think I first started surfing in the winter, so I was just getting my ass kicked by violent waves. And it was a good, learning experience, makes you a stronger paddler, makes you deal better with the chaos of just getting clobbered by waves. Of course, the learning curve is you die if you mess up. I had a pretty thick wetsuit on, and I had a hood on over that. And then I had these insulated, wet dry gloves.
Yep.
But when you first put into the water, it is just brutal. And eventually you adjust and your temperature regulates and all that. But I bet it's even colder up there where you are in the winter.
Yeah, honestly, the water, it's interesting because the water doesn't change temperature all that much, just a couple degrees in either direction, but it stays pretty similar. And I've been told that's just because of the currents kind of coming down from Alaska and stuff. So the water stays pretty cold, but it's consistent. It doesn't change too much. So if you get used to it at any point in the year, you're pretty much used to it, which is nice.
But it's also not the water, it's the wind, because you spend most of your time on top of your board wet, not in the water that's somewhat insulated.
That's true. Surfing in the snow makes you feel super cool, though. If you're surfing in the snow, you do feel pretty badass. Whether that is justified, but in any way, doesn't matter. It feels that way.
What's cooler than surfing? Snow.
Right. Absolutely.
I have read, as we were discussing, the snowpack is depleted. Does this mean we are more or less safe from icy mountain monsters?
Definitely less. I think they are probably thawing out if they've been lying dormant for a long time. And if they were sealed away under any ancient glaciers by some sort of magics, that kind of stuff is probably going away at some point in the near future. And, you got to come down for resources. and things like that. So yeah, I would say we're in a lot more danger these days. It might be the unspoken threat of global warming that nobody's talking about, but those primordial cryptids and ancient supernatural forces are going to only be more malevolent in the future.
Nobody's talking about it except for you. I feel like this is a good a transition as we're going to get into your book, CAIRN. Can you set this trilogy up for us? Because I don't think you were here for the first book.
It's a rock climbing horror trilogy. The first book is titled Crevasse, and the second book is CAIRN, and the third book tentatively called Cottage right now. Cottage or cabin, gonna stick with the C thing, and either way it will be a home of some kind, cottage or cabin most likely. The trilogy, the real goal with it is to explore the sort of primordial indifference of nature and the sort of terror that comes inherently with that. I was inspired to write Crevasse originally by the death of Marc-Andre Leclerc, who was a very ambitious and famous mountaineer. There's a movie about him called The Alpinist. It's very, very good. But he was a very daring free soloist out in the mountains in alpine environments. He would free solo ice. So like he would do what Alex Honnold does, but on ice, which is insane. But the thing about his death that was inspiring to me was, in terms of telling a story and it being a horror story, was the fact that when he did die, it wasn't doing that. It wasn't doing some crazy free solo ice picks on this little thin sheet of like rhyme that nobody should trust ever with their life, but he would do on a regular basis. He was just doing a pretty routine mountaineering day with a friend. He had a partner, he was on a rope, and they got hit by a random avalanche, and that was that, you know? So I kind of wanted my monster to represent that and kind of to explore that isolation / nature and adventure horror that, you know, I do feel is relatively underexplored. I think there's lots of isolation horror, but I think it's rarely rooted in like an adventure sport. And I've had this debate with a couple people, but there really only is a couple well-known examples. There's like Echo by Thomas Oldehoyvelt. There's a couple other climbing books. There's The Descent. But other than that, even if it is isolation, it's usually like friends get lost in the woods, but they're not necessarily doing an adventure sport. So I wanted to explore the sort of like the kind of people who put themselves in these predicaments on purpose, and that's their sort of their form of fun. And surfing, like we were talking about, is a form of that. Like you're choosing to put yourself in the ocean dressed like a seal, in very shark heavy waters a lot of the time. So like there's those aspects of it. You're putting yourself in the food chain. You're also like exposing yourself to all the dangers just inherent with massive bodies of water, and including currents and undertows. The mountains are the same way. If you're going out to, especially a range like the setting for Crevasse and for CAIRN is the Southern Picket Range in Washington. It's a real range. It's where the most people go missing per capita in the Northern Cascade Range every year, which is why I chose it. There's also conveniently a mountain literally called Mount Terror and a Terror Glacier. Those are real things. So that was, you know, super handy for a horror book. But if you go that far out, and the Southern Pickets are way out there, it takes like a day just to get out there. If you know where you're going, it'd probably take you a day and a half or 2 days if you don't. And that's if you don't get lost. You're putting yourself in the food chain. You're putting yourself back into nature to a degree that human beings rarely do, unless they are like professionals or very, very enthusiastic hobbyists. They have entire reality shows based around it, like Alone, where that's what these people do. But like the majority of people have probably never spent longer than a week or so out in the woods, proper in the woods, like especially alone with no technology, surviving off the resources the woods provide alone. And most of us, frankly, would be incapable of doing so. We would die inside that week. Or get very close to it and be lucky to get out alive, right? It's very dangerous, the nature, and we've forgotten that because we are so comfortable now and everything is so convenient. We always have our hierarchy of needs met. We have our shelter, we have our food, we have our water. This is a very long explanation to the point of this series, which is, luckily, Jeff edits this podcast, so he won't subject you listeners to all of this drivel. But I wanted to explore that aspect of horror, that aspect of that inherent danger that lives in the mountains, and my monster kind of represents that. So it's a supernatural shape changer, voice stealer type monster, one of my favorite kinds. It's not a specific type of monster. It's kind of my own take on a hodgepodge of, skinwalkers, wendigos, werewolves, all those kind of things. The boogeyman also, if you take the Stephen King's outsider approach, it's not a dissimilar monster to that creature either. So book one I see as the adventure. Book one, they go out, they go climbing, they run into the creature, things happen. I won't spoil it to you, but suffice to say, a lot of people are upset about the way it ends, and it ends rather abruptly for a lot of characters. And then book two was always kind of, and I love that it's book two of a trilogy, because I feel like a lot of the time, book two of a trilogy is sometimes where a story's like either figuring out where it's going or it feels like a little bit of a sag. But for me, it's the heart of the story, which is I really wanted to explore the characters who are left behind by the adventure. And I feel we don't talk about those characters nearly enough in fiction. I think it happens more in horror, maybe, than it does in other genres. But it's still an aspect of horror and grief that I love to explore through that psychological horror lens. And so book two, CAIRN, the one we're talking about today, is the story of those the adventure leaves behind, would be my pitch of it. So there's a character in Crevasse who dies. Book two follows his parents grieving the loss of their child, and the loss of another friend as well, all to the same circumstances. And it's also this sort of convergence with other people fighting through grief in a similar way. One being Miranda, who was the girlfriend of the very first character to die in Crevasse. I don't mind telling you that Travis Jaden dies in Crevasse because it's literally the prologue. So that happens, and if you've ever heard me read at a convention or anything, I usually do read that chapter, The Man in the Red Coat, where Travis dies, and he's sort of my Marc-Andre Leclerc avatar. He dies in the prologue, and then his girlfriend Miranda is a main character in CAIRN, as is the ghost of one of the other characters who dies in Crevasse. I try to continue the narratives in a way that feels, not too soap opera-y to me, where it's just like, the character's still here though, don't worry. But kind of bringing a ghost into it a little bit, to represent the way that, those we love linger after they pass on. For us especially. And then the monster also does some of that with the way it lures its new victims out to the mountains with the souls of those it has killed, captured. So CAIRN is very much a story of fighting through grief and hopelessness and kind of wrestling with those feelings of, because I imagine if you're a parent of a kid who, dies in some kind of crazy accident doing an extreme sport, there's going to be some balance between obviously all the normal grief you have from losing a child, but also this feeling of like, why did they have to do that in the first place? I've read lots of articles on it, and I've talked to my parents about it. Like, I sent my dad pictures of like the route I was going to climb on Half Dome, and he was like, never do that again. He was like, you can tell me afterwards, but I do not want to know before. I don't want to have to think about it. I know what day you're going, so now I'm going to not be able to sleep that day. And that's, it's an interesting thing we subject our loved ones to. But at the same time, kind of expect them to accept us for it, and accept that that's an important part of our lives, because it is. But it's also something we have to think about. It's a burden that we're putting on people. And if something does go wrong, those people are going to have to ask those questions. And the abruptness of that kind of a death is, it's on par with like a suicide. It's just not the same thing. I don't know if any of that made sense, but I'm sure you'll make it sound smart, Jeff, because you're a good editor.
I'm not going to cut 1 second of that. It was perfect. I do have some questions for you, though, just to follow up on some of the stuff that you laid out there. Was this story planned as a trilogy, or did it start off as one book?
Yeah, so it was actually planned as a duology. I don't know if you know Daniel Green. He's a YouTuber. He does he's been going a long time. He has a good show that reviews fantasy books, and but he did something I liked where he wrote his debut novella, and then the sequel to the novella was a novel. So he kind of did both of his debuts in long fiction and then his debut in a novel in the same universe. and they kind of stood alone too. So that was my initial goal with this. As I finished the novel version of what I used to call Voices from the Cold, which is now the trilogy's name, I realized that no, I think this works better as a like a traditional trilogy, just in terms of concluding arcs and balancing out the pacing and the character development the way I wanted to. And when I first wrote Crevasse, I just wrote Crevasse. I didn't necessarily plan to continue that story, and I think you can tell when you read the ending, because I'm also a fan of the ending that doesn't end the way you expect, that doesn't end happy. Especially in horror, I think it's important for an ending to have a level of realism to it and a level of making sure the horror echoes out into the universe further than the conclusion of the story and kind of leaves you with that unsettling feeling. All my favorite horror stories do that, because it's not about just like, ha, gotcha, to the reader, like, ha, you thought that character was gonna live. Fuck you. That's not ever the goal. The deaths still have to be earned and everything, and I hope that readers of Crevasse feel that they were. So when I finished that story, that was my first like long form thing I've ever written. So I was like way too green, frankly, to have ambitions higher than that. And as I continued to develop and grow, and I kind of revisited Crevasse and started thinking about trying to get it reprinted with another kind of edit, which did eventually happen. Thank you, Dark Forest Press in Bellingham. I then realized I had more of that story that I wanted to tell. And so the idea of Voices from the Cold, that is now going to be 2 books instead of 1 novel, came to be. And a big part of that, too, was submitting it to agents. So I did all that stuff. I've been working on CAIRN for like 4 years. I had it as a novel. I submitted it to lots of agents. I had one agent very close to representing it, to the point where he wrote me like a 20-page feedback developmental report, basically, as to like, I like this story. It's solid, but here's all the reasons I don't think I could sell it. And those reasons were extremely helpful. I took that and I edited it again, and now it's the book that it is, and there will be a book 3.
What were some of the challenges of writing the middle book of a trilogy? One
of the big ones for me was, as I said, this is a big shift narratively and tonally. And by the time you got the version you got, it had already been repaired quite a bit. And still, because Jeff helped beta read this. Thank you for doing that, Jeff. But there had already been pretty substantial repairs to the pacing and things like that by the time you got it. It used to be way slower than it was when I gave it to you guys. That was the hardest part, because of what I really wanted to do with this one was talk about those the adventures leave behind, the grief horror, the psychological horror, this sort of very brooding, slow burn narrative. And Crevasse is not that story. Crevasse is pretty fast paced. It's rock climbing and monsters and creepy voices outside your tent pretty much from the jump. There's a zombie bear in the prologue. Like, come on, you know? It's very action packed. But CAIRN is not. CAIRN is much slower. CAIRN takes its time, and I still had to work quite a bit to make sure that it still felt like it lived in the same universe. I had to go back and do a lot of edits. I had to cut a lot of scenes of people in bars, or people researching, or people arguing in the living room, or people brooding and walking around their houses all depressed and alcoholic. There's still plenty of that in there, but there used to be too much. And I had to reinfuse it with some, making sure some characters were getting out to nature, and making sure that the nature horror, the isolation horror, was still a pivotal part of the narrative as well, despite the fact that that also increases your tension. Because if you're going to move the characters closer to the monster, then you're going to expect the monster to be there waiting for them. So every time you move a character closer, you're speeding up the pace of your story. And I very much did not want this story to be too fast. I wanted it to take its time. And the third book, again, will pick up a little bit more. So I kind of wanted it to feel like Crevasse, you're sort of like moving the whole time, is like pushing the rock up the hill. For book 2, I kind of wanted it to feel like that moment where you start to tip the rock over the hill, and it's like the hardest part of the push, and then it starts to finally roll and you get it over the top. And then book 3 is going to be that rock rolling down the hill to smash into something. And so that's the best way I can kind of describe the narrative movement that I anticipate and that I'm shooting for, and making sure that that didn't get too slow and too arduous and too gloomy, without being exciting and without feeling like a climbing and adventure horror horror novel, because it still is that. Was the biggest challenge for this particular one?
We have a panel coming up at Crypticon. It's called Realism and Horror, and that definitely tracks for Crevasse and CAIRN because they're so rich with detailed technical expertise. In your opinion, how does this add to suspense or horror?
Yeah, I love realism, and I find it extremely vital when it comes to horror because it plays a role in believability, and believability is pretty vital to fear, at least for me. I hear people will sometimes, especially people who say, oh, I don't really like horror, and one of the main complaints I will hear is like, people are way scarier. That could never really happen. Or something to that extent, right? Where it's like, if I wanted to be scared, I would just watch the news or anything like that. Good horror can be just as effective as any serial killer narrative, as anything you will find on the news, because it represents and personifies a piece of yourself that you're afraid to acknowledge. And it gives you a way to look at it and process it and break it down. So that's what I love about good horror, and I think realism helps us get there, because the more realism you can infuse your speculative fiction with, the more you can play with those speculative elements and foster buy-in for your readers. Because the more you introduce speculation, and just in case you don't know what I mean, I just mean like anything supernatural, anything paranormal, anything fantastic that couldn't really happen. And I'm using big air quotes because I know this is audio only. The more you're going to introduce those aspects, the more you kind of, to me, need to balance it with realism. So if you're going to have, say, China Melville's Perdido Street Station, where shit is just bonkers, and there's like where everybody has sort of accepted that people are like half bug, and that's just fine. They don't even look at it twice. He drops you right in there. But that works for him because he's a really good character developer. So the characters are so believable, so realistic, their actions so organic that you don't really care about the bizarre shit. But I think in horror, it's more important than anything else, because if we don't believe in the characters, if we can't see ourselves in the characters, and we don't think they're in any real danger, then there's no stakes, and therefore there's no fear. I hope that answers the question.
I think you covered it pretty well. It's so fun because, like, in Crevasse, there's so many active scenes of climbing and scenes of lead up. They're checking the weather, they're checking the route, they're checking their maps, and they're triple checking their gear. Mm-hmm. On the one hand, you're like, okay, these are very sober people who are very aware of their environment, and they have all this safety gear. They're really strong, fit, they're prepared for anything. How is this scary? Because I can't relate to that. These aren't normal people. These are like extreme athletes, challenging nature at like the highest level. But then you realize all of these variables that they're checking can change, and all of the safety equipment that they are trusting their life in, those are all points of failure. So when it does go sideways, it is terrifying. Mm-hmm. You spend a lot of time in nature. You obviously draw a lot of inspiration from the environment. In your opinion, are winter conditions the scariest fuck you that nature can shove down your throat? And have you written any ocean or desert scenarios?
I love reading ocean and desert stuff. I haven't written much. I want to. I definitely have ambitions to write a horror story. I don't know if it'll be a novel or what, based around surfing. That's a project for the future for sure, because that's a sport I've gravitated heavily towards. And obviously, you sit out there a long time, and it's such a place of zenness and peace, but it's also terrifying if you think about the ocean for any amount of time.
Any amount of time.
Definitely the scariest place on the planet is the ocean for humans, because we just simply don't belong. It's a different planet, and we still don't know jack about it, and that's because we so very much do not belong. So I would say, I mean, the ocean is the scariest environment to me, but you know, if you get high enough in altitude, mountains are the same way. You've got the death zone on Everest, and all the tallest mountains, the 16, 17 tallest mountains in the world, all have that zone. They all get high enough in altitude where if you aren't either an absolute freak athlete with a very intense plan and regimen to like do it without oxygen, then you need oxygen. And if you don't have one of those two things, you will die. And you might die anyway. like fantastic athletes die at high altitude all the time. Most of the bodies up on Everest in that like zone of death where there's just frozen bodies all over the place, those people were all extremely motivated, extremely skilled, extremely athletic people. Like, you can't get to that point without being that. And it's easy to forget that because we don't talk about those people as individuals. We talk about them as a statistic. Regarding weather conditions specifically, yeah, I mean, there's a reason all of our holidays are in the winter. Not all of them, but like a lot of our big feasting and get your family together and celebrate that you have people around you who love you and everything. No, whatever tradition you come from, whatever culture, you probably have a winter tradition based around bring the family together, eat a bunch of food, maybe exchange gifts, and tell stories and celebrate that you're all not dead right now. There's a reason for that. It's because winter's a terrifying time. It is the time when, even in this era of extreme comfort and ease and, relatively speaking, compared to when we used to live off the land, even now, it's when you do have to start taking better care of your vehicle. You have to switch your tires. You have to warm up your vehicle before you go out. You have to shovel your driveway. You have to do all these things because winter closes its jaws around you. You also have to keep an eye on your mental health to a higher degree, especially if you live in the Pacific Northwest, where it's like dark by 4:30. I mean, it's a real thing. People get depressed out here during the winter. There's a reason there's a really high suicide rate in Alaska, where it just like is dark for days and months at a time. So that stuff all affects you. And there's a really high degree of very psychological real life horror that creeps in on every level, from physical to mental. It is both psychologically and physically harder to just live in the winter for every animal, not just for humans. The bears hibernate, squirrels stockpile all year for it. Like every animal prepares, and a lot of animals die. I mean, I grew up in a very extreme weather place. Like Cutbank, Montana is known as the coldest place in the nation. We have a penguin statue and everything. And there have been recorded instances in my lifetime where during the winter we will be colder than Antarctica. Just because of right where we are, we're right on the high desert in Montana. We're right where the winds come off the Rocky Mountains. So we regularly get like 40, 60 mile an hour winds that'll drop the temperature with wind chill by another 20 degrees. So I've been there for days where it was 40 below. And like college classes all got canceled because they didn't want people walking outside, period. I have seen like something that'll happen in those 40-degree days is like the pigeons will they all clump together and they try to survive the night by like nesting really close to a tree and kind of clumping together. You'll come out in the morning and they're all just frozen solid, just dead, frozen solid. And these are pigeons, man. Pigeons are survivors. They're hard birds to kill, but that's like a level of cold where it's like it's not possible to survive outside in those conditions. And that's like a different kind of desert too, to answer that question. But I'm working on a novel that takes place in Cutbank right now, but that's so far away, I'm not even teasing it right now. But I'm writing something desert that is that kind of desert. I love desert horror. I mean, I love the desert. It's a very spooky, mystical, magic place. The deserts of Utah, the Red Rock Canyons and stuff, that's some of my favorite places on the entire planet. That's where my wife and I spent a very long sabbatical because it's just a, magical place. But I haven't written much down there.
I've gradually come to the realization that Christmas is scarier than Halloween. I still love Halloween. I love them both. But when it comes to fear, the Yuletide season has it on lock. So you had mentioned an upcoming project. Obviously, book 3 is waiting in the wings. Without giving too much away about the end of CAIRN, can you tell us a bit about what to expect in book 3 of the trilogy?
Yeah. So if crevasse is sort of seen as the inciting incident of the trilogy where the adventure goes wrong, CAIRN is the active processing of that grief and the characters finding different ways to cope with it and try to get to the other side of the grief. And the characters who survive the book are those who manage to do that to some degree. And Cottage or Cabin, whichever one it ends up being, my publisher will have a say in that, will be about the grief coming home despite your thinking you've dealt with it. It'll be that kind of secondary wave that hits you, and sometimes that's a year later, sometimes it's a few weeks later after you feel like you've cried all your tears, you've gone to the funeral, you've said your goodbyes. That second wave will hit you, and it hits you really, really hard, and it can hit you out of nowhere. The monster in the third book will kind of be representative of that, of the grief, like truly coming home and hitting the whole community, and the way the community bands together and responds to grief, and the way that community and family and friends and those people around you that love you and care for you can help you. Ultimately, you can't cure grief, but it can help you stave it off and find a way to truly work through it and deal with it. So that'll be kind of the mission will be to illustrate that through the way the small community of Darrington bands together to drive the creature away in some capacity.
Excellent. And book 2 is going to release soon. Is there a pre-order link?
There is. I will send it to you.
And I will put it in the show notes.
Thank you. Yeah, there's a pre-order link. Please pre-order it. And if you want to get a signed copy in person, and you happen to be in the Seattle area, you can come to Crypticon Seattle. I'll be releasing it on Saturday, May 2nd, around 10 a.m. at the convention. And Sadie Hartman is my in-conversation partner.
Fantastic. I'll be there.
Literally. You will.
Yeah.
Yes.
Clay, what are you working on next?
Yes, we talked on this show before about my collection Rain Shadows, which is a collection of dark tales from Washington State that I co-authored with Tamara Selman. We're currently working together on the second iteration of that, the second volume. So we are doing the podcast again where we give each other prompts and we write stories based on those prompts, and then we critique the stories on our podcast Beneath the Rain Shadows. So that's what that podcast is. We're very focused on that book right now. And this year it's exciting because it's not just Tamara and I. We have invited 2 more authors into the fold. So we also have M. Lee, who is president of the PNWA, and she is a really awesome speculative fiction writer out here in Washington. And we've invited Gordon B. White, who is a very widely published short story author and novelist from the Seattle area. So he's super, super good. If you've never read Gordon, just go look at Nightmare Magazine. He's in there a bunch of times. He's in lots of things, but he had a story like 2 issues ago at Nightmare that was really, really good. So you can check that out. But yeah, so Gordon and M. Lee are joining us. So we're writing those stories right now. I wrote mine last month, and Gordon's is due this month. I'm also working on I've just finished work on the newest volume of the Crypticon anthology, Crypticon Seattle Writing Contest anthology. That one's fun. We put out an open call. We get a whole bunch of submissions. We publish the top 5 contestants, and then we also contract 4 to 5 professional authors to fill out the pages and kind of like make it a pro level anthology. So that's really, really fun. I've just recently sent that off to print, so I should be getting a box of books any day. But yeah, we release that every year at the Crypticon Seattle convention. So that'll be May 1st release. And it's another short story collection with a bunch of awesome stuff in it. Wendy Wagner's in there. Our friend Alyssa Alessi is in there. Nina Veal is in there, whose novel's up for the Stoker. And my friend Eric Keevan is the other pro. And then I can't talk about the winners yet because that's not announced. But there's 5 winners, and they're all good. It's going to be great.
I know who's got my vote.
Yeah, you do. Thank you, Jeff, for being a jury member. That was awesome.
That was fun. What can you say about our upcoming coverage of the Stoker Award nominations?
Yeah, so Jeff and I are teaming up to do some Stoker Nom coverage. These are going to be panel-style discussions with invited authors in the categorical fields. So if you're not familiar, the Stoker Cons is like the Emmys of horror writing. It's like the biggest award, one of the biggest awards, that and like the Shirley Jackson and the Edgar Award and stuff like that you can win as a horror author. And every year there's 13 categories, so we're not covering every single category, but we're doing our best to cover as many as we can. We're going to go through each of the nominated works. We've got somebody assigned to sort of do basically summary coverage of each work. And then we're also, in our panel discussions, will be focused more on the categories themselves. So for example, next week, I think we're doing short stories. We'll have a panel for the novelist one, for example. We'll have a panel of novelists, and we've gotten as many of the nominated authors as we can to join us, and then a couple other people to fill out the ranks who are accomplished novelists themselves. And then we will discuss what it takes to stand out as a novelist in the horror field, and sort of the experience of getting nominated for a Stoker Award for those who have been nominated, and a nice comprehensive discussion on what it takes to be a successful novelist in the horror genre. So yeah, it's really just going to be a panel on that kind of stuff, with the sort of extra bonus of having nominees of the actual award on the panel, and the coverage will also be attached, but that might be done in a sort of a separate time and then edited in. So it'll be really good though. It's going to be fun.
Fantastic. Tell our listeners where they can find you online.
So the best place to find me online is my newsletter, which is through the Fermented Fiction Substack. Fermented Fiction's kind of an umbrella of a lot of the things I do. So if you join my newsletter on my Fermented Fiction Substack, you'll get my personal writing newsletter. You'll get updates on Beneath the Rain Shadow, and you'll get updates on Fermented Fiction and episodes delivered right to your inbox. So I definitely recommend just signing up there. If you want to follow me on social media, I'm pretty much only on Instagram these days, really. I post to other places, updates and stuff. I'm at Clay Vermulm Fiction everywhere. And then finally, I have a website, clayvermulmfiction.com, that hasn't been updated so long, I had to make Jeff read my bio twice.
Clay, thanks for coming on the show and telling us about CAIRN.
My pleasure, man. Thank you for having me.
And as a postscript, here's my pitch for book 3. The title: Castle, Condo, or Crib.
Crib. That would be a very different vibe. I'll let Joe know.
Thanks for listening. Links are in the show notes. Please subscribe and follow. You can find me at jeffcccarter.com and pick up my collection, We Bleed Orange and Black, 31 fun-sized tales for Halloween. Until next time, stay spooktacular.